Welcome back to the show, everybody. Kyla here. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Pastor and Postmaster. We want to wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from Bo, Ryan, and myself. Just before we start the episode, I wanted to tell you that we were having some slight audio difficulties on this episode, but we just thank you for hanging in there, as always, while we start off this journey of podcasting. So not always easy, definitely comes with some bumps sometimes. So thank you for hanging in there and liking and sharing our stuff. We just think that you guys are the best, and we're glad that you are here. And we will see you in January for the next set of podcasts. Okay, bye.
Welcome to the Pastor and Postmaster podcast, what you wanted to hear in the sermon, but you didn't.
Where the Academy meets every day.
Hey, you guys just missed a funny joke. Pastor Ryan just called it the pasta. He almost said pasta and Postmaster.
I was trying to fake an English accent.
The pasta and the Postmaster.
Yes.
And that's why we don't fake it, accents.
It'd be great to do the whole entire set where I'm faking an English accent.
Complete in Cockneys. Well, welcome everybody. I was going to start by saying Merry Christmas.
Feliz Navidad.
Hey.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Oh, they're holy days.
Happy holy days.
Happy holy days.
Well, we're getting to that time. You see our festive tree back there and our pillow. Isn't that nice? Look at
Very
that.
festive and gray. Not that pillow. Sorry.
Okay. But so I just wanted to start with not a couple updates, but one major update. Of course, we'll be back here in January to start back up the new year with a New Year's episode, but this is our last one for the year. Yeah. Not that we've done that many.
Number 9.
It's number 9, guys. It's a lot. So we're going to be back here in January. That was the first bit of news. The other bit of news is Ryan is going to be a dad. And I just wanted to, for the 5th time.
Yes.
And so I have a very important bit of news. But first, not news, but we're going to say the name of the baby. But first things first, is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
I haven't seen that movie.
I've been convinced that it is.
It is. It is.
In fact, I put it in my queue on Prime just today.
Oh, perfect. Well, anyway,
we didn't even plan that.
Now that that's out of the way, Ryan's baby's name is going to be Augustine or Augustine. Anyway, he's a nerd about all that stuff, so he's going to name his baby after his favorite, biblical. What do you call him?
Scholar, theologian. Yeah.
So, how do you say the name of the baby? Tell us.
Augustine.
Can we?
We're going to call him Augie. We already call him Augie. He's moving
Not
already.
Augustin Glut?
Agustino. And
cool.
We're going to get middle name. I think this kind of solidifies it because I'm making this up.
It's going to be Vance.
It's going to be Vance.
It's going to be in the true Christmas spirit because he's going to be born in March. Emmanuel.
Oh,
nice. Yes, Emmanuel.
So Augustine?
Augustine
Emmanuel. Anyway, congratulations.
Emmanuel, God with us, which is a very great transition to the season. Christmas. Merry Christmas, Emmanuel, God with us.
Mm-hmm. The incarnation.
The incarnation. We are talking today about something related to Christmas, the Jewishness of Jesus, and the relation to contemporary antisemitism. And before we get into that, well, Bo, we actually have a story. I don't have a story. You have a story about antisemitism.
Hit us with it.
Yeah, I was introduced to antisemitism at a very young age. And so my understanding of antisemitism is occasional. And by that, I mean, it's like in Paul's writings, Paul does occasional theology. He doesn't write a systematic theology. He's got occasions arising questions from churches, and so he deals with those. And so we put that together, and that's how we get Pauline theology. It's occasional. And so my views on anti-Semitism are occasional, whereas Ryan's are researched and well thought out.
They're not lived experience, Bo, like yours.
Mine's lived experience.
Mine either.
So as a young boy growing up in Whittier, California, my grandmother lived in El Monte.
El Monte.
See. And so when we went to see her on Sundays or whenever, we had to drive down Peck Road, and we would drive by the Nazi house, which was the...
Not your own house, by the way.
No, I think it was the headquarters of the American Nazi Party at the time. Wow. This is around 1960, all the way up until the 70s. And so it was this house with large swastikas on it. So my parents, when I was a small child, 5, 6, 7 years old, they had to explain to me who these people were. And there was a van parked outside a 40-foot, trailer for a van, stenciled on there, gas van, occupancy 100 Jews.
Whoa.
And so, yeah, and for the listeners, if you doubt the veracity of this story, you can Google video, the Nazi house, JDL riot, okay? And you will find local TV coverage of when the Jewish Defense League, a
Civil rights?
militant Jewish group, the Jewish Defense League, they went down and started assaulting the Nazis, and arrests, highway patrol out there, with belly clubs and all that. So that was my introduction to anti-Semitism. Wow. And then it would come full circle when I was the postmaster of Camptonville, California, and one of my customers was Joseph Turner, and he was running a Nazi commune up in Forest City.
Okay.
And mailings out of my office.
Okay.
And I can,
weirdest
and maybe
people.
later on, if you'd like to know how I finally figured out these guys were Nazis, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, we'll talk on
Wow,
that
we
later.
should talk about that.
Yeah.
If you doubt the veracity of the story, just look at this podcast and trust us on this one.
Yeah.
No.
Hey, we can put some links down there.
Yeah, no,
Let's
you
do
put
it.
the links down. No, I believe you that because that would be very easy to falsify. That is remarkable. It's interesting. The anti-Semitism stuff. It's not just like a lot of these podcast episodes. They're not just pet issues, but we're thinking of our contemporary culture. You could look it up online. There's all sorts of anti-Semitism around, whether it's protests in our own country at college campuses, whether it's in Netherlands. A month and a half ago, you had some Israeli athletes that were assaulted, and of course the Israeli-Hamas war, and most Muslim countries, pretty much all Muslim countries. So it's an interesting thing because we think about Christmas, we think about, as O come, Emmanuel says in one of its verses, O come thou rod of Jesse, free thine own from Satan's tyranny. So the rod of Jesse is a reference to Isaiah 11:1. Jesus is a Jew. And we've titled this after an old essay, because it's 500 years old, from Luther, Jesus Christ was born a Jew.
But wait a minute. I thought Luther was an anti-Semite.
Friend, I'm glad you asked that question because we're going to get to work towards that. But the early Luther, very, I guess you'd say, for his time, surprisingly open and tolerant of the Jews before the very end of his life. So there's a lot to say there about why that changed. But yes, he says explicitly he's against coerced conversions, which were pretty standard in the Middle Ages. There were forced conversions with the threat of exile, imprisonment, even death. Man, there's so much there. But anyway, I do want to talk about a little bit about a controversy recently about the Netflix had a movie. I haven't seen it yet, a series about Mary, and they used an Israeli actress named Noah Cohen.
Oh, good. So it was historically accurate.
Wrong. As many of the trolls and other open-minded critics said, no, Mary and Joseph were Palestinians.
So that doesn't. So that needs a fact check or a community note.
Palestinian, yeah.
Are we going to community note that
Yeah,
for
yeah.
our ex?
I don't think that it's interesting that not just they're Jewish, that they were Israeli specifically because the context of that war going on right now. But I do think it's ridiculous on one hand, but it's understandable too because Palestine is really kind of the remnants of a Roman name for the region, which is Israel today. It includes a little bit of Syria and includes Jordan partly. I mean, those boundaries are somewhat contrived, but the basic idea was that the Romans called it Syria Palestiniae, basically kind of a dig at the Jews. It's not Judea, it's not Israel. It is Philistine.
Interesting because on
Philistia.
their what was this on it's called BS 50. I don't know, Business Standard. Anyway, there's a quote here, and it says Mary stars Israelis Noah Cohen, right? It's these people. It's getting backlash because, quote, they're getting criticized for, quote, erasing Palestinian identity and spreading historical inaccuracies about the family of Christ. I'm like,
Bo, since you're a resident Islamic scholar, would that have to do with the Quran specifically?
yeah, that's
No, I don't think.
I don't think
so.
it
No,
does.
No,
what it makes no sense.
no. I think
Yeah.
the Quran totally.
When did they care about the family
it-
of Christ?
Israel's not. Jerusalem's only the third most holy site in Islam. So yeah, it's very interesting. There's a little bit of a combination of both Islamic, Marxist, post-colonial ideology that's flooding that in there. But I would say this though too: when you think about the Jewishness of Jesus, and he is Jewish, not he was, has been, is the ascended Lord forever. There's such a particularity of it. It's specific. It's God's choice that you can see how it really, that's offensive. It's like God's election.
Well, yeah, God's freedom in election is always a scandal to everybody. As a matter of fact, some guys and I, we get together on Tuesday mornings regularly to discuss systematic theology, and we're in the chapter on election, and that's always scandalous to people, even people who love God, who have put their faith in Jesus. There's still something there that chafes against us, that God is going to exert His will regardless.
And it's funny that people that would have a problem with, say, Calvinistic views on election still have to wrestle with the fact that God chose a particular people.
Yeah.
And not because they were great, not because they were many. God makes that clear to them.
And Deuteronomy.
It's for my own purposes, my own glory.
So when you think of like God choosing one person in particular, you should also think, well, he also chose one particular nation and made that nation. I mean, Abraham is from modern day Iraq.
Right. So God chose an Iraqi.
He chose an Iraqi. So an Iraqi savior.
By any, there's not much there, but he's not wandering around out in Iraq searching for God when God calls him.
No, he's not.
He wasn't on a quest, as far as we know.
And one of the mysteries about anti-Semitism is, like you pointed out too, he's from modern day Iraq. He comes from a broadly Middle Eastern people group, and there are a lot of people that have connections to that are not Jewish.
Yes.
So that's always the mystery. Why is it anti-Semitism if you would have Arabs and Egyptians, people mixed from that same ancestry, but for something about Israel in specific is the offense and stumbling block. I also want to say too, the idea that God chose one particular people, but also chose them to be a blessing. You are a chosen people, a holy priesthood.
Well, don't you think a lot of times when we're talking about things like that, we're so offended that we stop at the choosing part, so we don't really hear the blessing part.
Yeah, yes,
Right?
yes.
Or what it means for the rest of the world, or all peoples.
And it is a blessing for all people.
Which the temple was, God says this is a house for all people.
Yeah. The angels announced that this is this is good news that will be for all people. This is this is a gospel that will be for all people.
Right. So for those who are listening, get beyond the choosing part, the election part.
Yep.
And embrace God's love for the world.
And embrace the way he did it. So it's really interesting to see anti-Semitism, and there are all different reasons why people oppose the Jews, and we'll kind of get to that as we get here today. But I want to say too, just the church's early relationship to the Jews was, of course, Jews were the first Christians. They, it seems in the book of Acts, would go to synagogue, but then also worship on the Lord's Day, resurrection.
Yep.
From the Roman government's perspective, they were a legal religion.
Yeah, and for the first century, at least, Rome saw Christians as a sect of Judaism, and it wasn't until after about the second century where the Romans, as an empire, are figuring it out. There's a difference here. There's been a bifurcation.
Yep.
And these people are no longer we're not going to look at these people, these Christians, as part of this favored religion
Yep.
that we allow to worship as they please.
Yeah, and that created a problem for Christians early on. It seems there's freedom to spread, and the relationship with Judaism is complicated, as you see with the Apostle Paul. Some of his intensest times of persecution in the book of Acts. He says, I wash my hands and I go on to the Gentiles. That's kind of the ending of the book of Acts chapter 28, as he goes, I'm going to the Gentiles. So it's expanding without ever losing its Jewish roots. However, in the post-apostolic period, you do see a little bit more antagonism towards Jews in some of the writings we have. We don't have a lot of writings, but we have enough. Didache distinguishes Christians who fast on Fridays and Tuesdays, I believe it is, and Jews practice fast on different days. And the Didache writer says, like hypocrites that they are.
Yeah, so the teaching of the apostles.
Yes.
Around 95 AD.
95 AD,
would you say?
yes.
Yeah.
Yep, early dating of that
The
document.
Didache. And people, look, for non-specialists like me, the Didache. No. The Didache.
The D-I, no, sorry.
Right? Yeah, because I've heard people, like preaching, and they'll go in the Didache, and it's look.
In Greek, it's a key. It's
Right.
one letter. That's what throws you off.
Yeah. So the teaching of the apostles.
And that's important, by the way. That document wasn't discovered till I believe 1879. So it's crazy. It's like one of the earliest documents, and it wasn't found until less than 150 years
I
ago.
completely know what they're talking about.
Church
well,
History 1.
You're gonna. It's one of my hobby horses. It's one of my favorite non-canonical.
It's a very
writings.
Baptist document.
Oh yeah, and like
It is.
in the I don't know which translation it is, the one at the end of the 19th century. Each of the books in the has an introduction, and the guy introducing the Didache says the theology of the book is simple, almost childlike,
Yeah. Very simple.
and he says it's just like the New Testament, and I'm like, yeah,
how
simple,
it is.
almost childlike.
Yep. That's exactly. Oh, it's really cool. I mean, if you take just a basic church history class,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that you read. It's not that long, but
Ryan
And it-
teaches church history. You guys should join his class.
And it doesn't take you off
me.
like the Shepherd of Hermas and all these others. It's
Yeah.
very down to earth, very.
yep. But you do get an element there, and others
Yeah.
too, a little bit of hostility towards Jews, and the feeling was mutual. Early second century Jews excommunicated Christians from coming to synagogue. So there's a hard distinction. Justin Martyr has this famous book. It's called Dialogue with Trypho, and Trypho's a
Trypho the
Jew.
Jew.
He's talking about the Old Testament, how Christ fulfills it. And there's this famous statement where he says, you should know, Trypho, it says it in your scriptures, or should I say our scriptures. So there's idea there that we have now taken the place, we've replaced, we've assumed we have inherited the rights and the lineage and the spiritual blessings of the Jews. And that leaves us open in a question, well, is there anything left for the Jews? And to be honest, from that time period onward, you don't see much, like I'd say, sympathetic evangelism. You have laws that distinguish Jews from Christians. You have, if there are conversions, they're often done under duress, meaning they're like
Forced.
threats, forced. You do have acts of violence, usually not from the church officially, but because of mobs that are allowed to do it. You have exclusion. The Jews are often in areas and then expelled. I mean, you see it with Islam too. And so there's not this hope that you find later in the last couple hundred years that the Jewish people will exist as Jewish people but embrace Messiah, and we're going to be a part of that. So I think that's a really important dimension. We live in that era where before it was like, well, the church has taken the place of Israel. And I would say, it's interesting. Martin Luther, if you Google him and the Jews,
Not pretty stuff.
Yeah, not pretty stuff. The Jews and On the Jews and Their Lies, written in 1543, 3 years before he died. But early on, 20 years before that, one of his earlier writings on the Jews, and this is the title of our podcast, Jesus Christ was born a Jew. He says this: if I had been a Jew and had been such dolts and blockheads govern and teach the Christian faith, I had seen such dolts and blockheads govern and teach the Christian faith, I would sooner have become a hog than a Christian. They have dealt with the Jews as if they were dogs rather than human beings. They have done little else than deride them and seize their property. When they baptize them, they show them nothing of Christian doctrine or life, but only subject them to popishness and mockery. If the apostles, who were also Jews, had dealt with the Gentiles as we Gentiles deal with the Jews, there would have never been a Christian among the Gentiles. When we are inclined to boast of our position, we should remember that we are but Gentiles, while the Jews are the lineage of Christ. We are aliens and in-laws. They are blood relatives, cousins and brothers of our Lord. Therefore, if one is to boast of flesh and blood, the Jews are actually nearer to Christ than we are. If we really want to help them, we must be guided in our dealings with them, not by papal law, but by the law of Christian love. We must receive them cordially and permit them to trade and work with us, so that they may have occasion and opportunities to associate with us, hear our Christian teaching, witness our Christian life. If some of them should prove stiff-necked, what of it? After all, we ourselves are not all good Christians either.
Amen.
You get the idea here that he's concerned with the civil mistreatment of Jews. He does want their conversion. And part of his later writing was a frustration about that. As Carl Trueman points out, these are the rantings of a bitter old man who's frustrated at the end of his life, who shouldn't have written this. And so it's hurt his
But
reputation.
it just goes to show you, we don't put people, like, I'm not a Calvinist through and through, because I'm not going to, for me, I don't put people on these pedestals because they're just mere men. You know, Ryan's my pastor. I'm not going to, like, hail him. He's going to make
he's my
mistakes.
pastor.
Yeah.
I'm going to set myself
He's going to make
there for
mistakes.
this
It's just a good
I just
lesson.
want to sit at your feet.
I just want to glean from
You
your
could talk to
fields.
my wife more about what that would look like.
Glean from the corner,
Yeah.
from the corners. Anyway.
Oh my goodness. No, you're right though. He is a mere man. And I think that's also important, like for history too. It's like, hey, like, you know, bad things, bad writing sometimes, it's not denial of Christ.
It's a good lesson, man.
Or a good lesson. It's a good lesson for legacy too. I mean, it really hurts his legacy. Hitler took advantage of that document, even though
Absolutely.
Luther never dreamed of the reasons why there was anti-Semitism and Nazism. But you see in King David's life, the kingdom began to unravel because of the sin he committed, even if he was forgiven. But I want to say this too, because as evangelicals, we statistically have the highest view of the Jews in Israel today than probably any demographic, certainly in our country. Very high percentage. It's not mutual, by the way, because Jews are much secular. They're like the inverse of us. Our religiosity is matched by their secularity. So it's kind of a funny, strange group of bedfellows, you could say. But that goes back because our heritage, we go back to the Reformation. If we're Baptists, it's specifically connected with John Calvin and his successors. And there's a very important Bible called the Geneva Bible. I have it right here. I just happen to have it right here next to me.
Look at that.
I'm going to carry it in my back pocket. It was written in 1599. It looks like it's in great shape because it was printed in 2006. But anyway, the original one is 1599. It's important because it's like the first study Bible with study notes. And so you think, well, why does that matter? Well, that is because a guy named Theodore Beza, who was the successor of John Calvin, these guys were all impressive linguists. He wrote commentary on a very important text for Christian-Jewish relations in Romans 11. Tell me.
I was going to say Romans 11. I wanted to get the teacher's approval, but
Go ahead. You got my approval.
Romans 11.
Romans 11:25. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this secret, lest ye should be arrogant in yourselves, that partial obstinacy has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Most modern English translations say
Partial hardening.
partial hardening. Now, many Christians would have said, well, in Paul's day, that was the case. But after that, the death of the apostles, it is done. No more Jews are we expecting to be converted. And many Christians would have agreed with this for hundreds of years. Beza says this, though. He says, the blindness of the Jews is neither so universal that the Lord hath no elect in that nation. So there are really Christian believing Jews, he says. Neither shall be continual, for there shall be a time wherein they also, as the prophets have foretold, shall effectually embrace that which they so now do so stubbornly, for the most part, reject and refuse. That is remarkable. So that many people looked at this Bible, pilgrims took it on the Mayflower, many's read Beza's commentaries and said, so there must be a time in the future when Jewish people in bigger numbers than now will embrace Christ.
Okay. So do you think that's quite an innovation, stepping away from medieval theology, coming into the Reformation? Was there anything like that before?
And not that I read about. No, I mean, the conversions were usually forced, like 1492, Ferdinand and Castile give the Jews the option to convert or to be kicked out of the Kingdom of Spain.
Expelled, sure.
Expelled. That's kind of what Luther's alluding to. Their property seized, not allowed to trade, had to wear special clothes. Fourth Lateran Council, the year 1215, said Jews have to wear separate clothing than Christians. So they're ghettoized.
Okay, so with the Geneva Bible, so is this where we see this favorable view of Jews on the part of the Anglophone or English-speaking world? England, then the New World, the Puritans in the New World, New Zealand, Australia, the English-speaking world. Do you think that's where it springs from, that commentary in the Geneva Bible?
Yeah, I mean, you do see a very positive view among the Jewish people in that transition period, not universally, but you do have, organizations that are begun for the evangelization of Jewish people.
Well, so I see a stark difference between the Anglophone world, the English-speaking world, and the continent. Now,
Yes.
but were there exceptions on the continent?
Within Lutheran countries and Catholic France, you see a lot more anti-Semitism. You have the example, obviously, in the medieval period of the Crusades. You have a rogue group of German crusaders, a guy named Volkmar, who begins to massacre Jews. And eventually he's stopped by other Christians, Hungarian knights, who wipe out that whole group. Not an official contingent, but kind of a rogue group that went out. And then you also have examples of bishops in these massacres called the Rhineland massacres. You can look them up online if you want to hear more details than we have to share. And many bishops sheltered at the risk of their own lives to stop Christians from killing Jews. So there were examples. It wasn't necessarily that they were thinking they were going to be converts, but they believed they should be protected. Now, one thing I'll say, this is important. So in the year 1290, King Edward I of England expelled all Jews from English lands. In 1656, Oliver Cromwell welcomes them back.
Yes.
Why would he do that? I mean, I think that's
Okay. So the Geneva Bible was printed when?
1599.
Okay, so 1599, you're at the very beginning of the Puritan century.
Yep.
Which goes roughly 1550 to 1689, William and Mary, the Act of Toleration.
Yep.
So Puritanism, it's still around, but with the Act of Toleration, you're no longer you're
not disenfranchised.
Yeah, you're not disenfranchised
based on your religion.
And so the Puritans are captivated by Jews and the Hebrew language. So there's one scholar, Michael Hoberman. Here's a Jewish scholar. I commend him to you, Michael Hoberman. He gets the Puritans. He's a Jewish scholar who gets American Puritanism. I was listening to him, and he's conversant in the writings of Cotton Mather, John Mather, Jonathan Edwards, everyone. And he points out that in Puritan America, if somebody met a Jew, they would immediately feel a kinship and say, "Tell me about your Bible and speak to me in Hebrew." They wanted to know Hebrew. And so you have this real kinship. And some would say it's because, by analogy, the pilgrims saw themselves as like the Jews.
Exiles.
They're exiles, right? They're persecuted. They're on the run, even into the 17th century. And so by the 1800s, one of the protagonists in our book, Jonathan Edwards.
Shameless promotion.
Jonathan Fisher, shameless promotion. This man is fascinated with language and Hebrew in particular. And he studied Hebrew at Harvard, where you had a Jewish man who was, he became a Hebrew teacher, not a professor, but an instructor there. And one of the conditions was that he had to convert to Christianity.
No, the conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. So his
So what did he do?
His name, he did. His name is, I want to get it right, Judah Monis. And so he's got a tract or a little booklet where he talks about his conversion. So he willingly converted. And so he wrote a Hebrew grammar, and that's the Hebrew grammar that Jonathan Fisher
Wow.
learned from, and then wrote his lexicon and transcribed the entire preface to Monis's Hebrew grammar. So these people were like latched on.
And people forget too that, I mean, the best Old Testament manuscripts we have were because scribes that transmitted the Old Testament through the Middle Ages. So people often ask, well, what about the Old Testament? Where'd the manuscripts come from? It's like, well, about 1000 AD. And they're like, 1000 AD?
What, you mean like
That's
you
how
can't
late
just-
it was? And it's like, do you realize how manuscripts are translated?
You can't. You mean you
and
can't just write? You
transmitted.
can't just like Jesus can't just come into your room and then download all of the
Yeah.
intel to you and
Yeah, we didn't
no
get our-
accountability. You can't do that.
Why couldn't they just be golden plates?
The Passion Translation.
Oh,
Why couldn't they be in stone?
come out.
Come on.
Come out.
The plates are in
Oh
my
boy.
head.
Oh boy.
I know.
And that was Reformed Egyptian that those plates were written in.
Fortunately, I can't translate them. So yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, that's really fascinating though. Yeah, that you would have a Hebrew scholar do that even late, and so you do have this positive view of Jews and expectation of conversion. I imagine his story was an encouragement. Like, here's a Jew who became a Christian. Many of you, I'm sure, have stories or know people on podcasts or YouTube that have converted to Christianity that are in Israel, and then they write books. They get a lot of attention. I've known many personally. The Jesus movement.
Let me speculate or ask a question that's speculative. You may or may not have the answer. So, what we know of in modern terms is you see the rise of Zionism
Yep.
in England, which will ultimately result in Israel becoming a nation in 1948. I mean, that's
Kind of the crescendo of the political.
yeah,
trajectory,
yeah. We're talking on the political side, because most Jews in Israel are secular Jews. They're not even believers.
By the way, there's a guy named Theodor Herzl who was like one of the early Zionist theorists, and he had two options: either go back to Israel, Palestine. They did call it Palestine because regionally is what it was, Palestine, or Argentina. This is like the 1890s, so that was it. Could have been Argentina.
Well,
Similar climate.
okay, and here's the deal too. Like, I think you were going to talk about an Ashkenazi Jew. Was it Renan?
I don't think Renan was Jewish.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Renan talking about
He was, yeah,
the Eastern European Jews.
yeah.
Monis was a Sephardic Jew, and a lot of the Jews in New England, Puritan New England, were Sephardic because they were part of the triangle trade, where produced finished goods would come from England to Africa, and then from Africa they would take slaves to the Caribbean and to South America, and from there the ships would go up to the Caribbean and so forth, and get molasses and sugar cane, then go up to New England and back to England with cotton and.
Wow. Now, did you
So
say finished goods or finish?
I made four legs to that triangle, but it's a triangle that goes down from England to Africa, to the southern hemisphere, and then back to England.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Yes. So yes, in the English-speaking world, and evangelicalism comes out of the English-speaking world, primarily England and Scotland, and of course in New England before it's America, United States. You do have an optimistic view of the end times called postmillennialism. We call it that. They didn't call it that. And that would be that one of the things that precedes this spiritual millennium, which, by the way, it came upon the midnight clear. There's a line that says, comes round the age of gold. Often newer versions of it will omit that. because it sounds too optimistic about the future. But one of the things they said was that one of the things that would happen would be that the Jews would be restored to to the Holy Land. Andrew Fuller thought that. He died in 1815. Jonathan Edwards thought that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mass conversions of Jews was a part of that. So if you're an evangelical, you're probably at least familiar with dispensationalism. Probably most of you, if you don't know that title, believe that. And so you see Israel's settlement, its creation or restoration as a part of God's providential work in history in a way that people who are not evangelicals don't quite understand, doesn't resonate with them. It's not a miracle story as it is for many of us. And that's because of this long heritage of expecting to happen.
Yeah, even both in postmillennialism and
Yeah.
dispensationalism. And then as missionary people in the English-speaking world going out to the rest of the world, you're taking this optimism, this positive view of Judaism, Jews, Israel around the world, right? So I mean, so you're kind
It's
of
spread to different places
immersing,
today,
the entire world.
There's also a threat in there that if you bless them, you'll be blessed, and if you curse them in Genesis, you'll be cursed. There's also
Yeah, and
that.
that's-
I
and
think
that-
that drives my.
Well, that would
Pro.
but that also be an interpretive question about like when that extends and to what extent, the people of God, are brought into, it gets to the heart of what we're talking about. Like, does that continue to the Jewish people apart from Christ? That would be for the Genesis 12 passage about we bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. There's a great quote. I can't remember if it's R. Reno or if it was Gerald McDermott. I was looking this up online because I read it and I can't remember where I got it, but he just said the destinies of Christians and Jews are mysteriously intertwined.
Yep.
And I think that's true because I think maybe dispensationalism is maybe too hard about what they know is going to happen exactly. But I think there is a destiny that's intertwined. And the reason why anti-Semitism is so spiritually dark is that there's so many different groups that unite around the hatred of the Jews for all sorts of different
Disparate
reasons.
groups
Exactly.
that don't get along.
Don't get along. LGBT, Islamists, atheist communists,
Satanists.
right-wing ideologues, Nazis.
Right. And so that's why it's so hard to, like if you hear someone say, oh, they're Nazis or this guy's an anti-Semite.
You know what a real
get
Nazi is.
You get this view in your mind of what they're talking about, but it's really not a consistent or a predictable motive that, from one anti-Semite to another. It's kind of like, while we're making this podcast, the Assad government just collapsed.
Yeah.
So people are going, well, what's going to happen in Syria? Who's the good guy there? And finally, I'm hearing people say,
No good guys.
there's no good guys there.
They're all bad guys.
And so like, how are you going to unite the country? Let me see. You've got Druze, you've got Shia, you've got Sunni, you've got Kurds, and then you have Turkey wanting to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. And that's how the whole
Golan Heights.
mess was started in
1917.
Post World War I, trying to break up the Ottoman Empire. So
That'd be a good podcast in itself. The Ottoman Empire.
So it's similar in that when you're talking about anti-Semitism, you're not looking at this monolithic, consistent group of people. You have to take if you're dealing with an anti-Semite, for example, it's going to take you a bit to figure out what kind of anti-Semite.
Exactly. There's
you're
so
dealing
many
with.
different.
So many different
What's
kinds.
their issue?
Yeah.
And why? And it's all puzzling why. There are 4 different classifications. There's
Here
not
we
just
go.
4.
This will help you.
Yeah, it's almost
might
like
be helpful.
we talked about this before. So 4 different classifications. There's and it's not like it's like a canon. It's like there's just different classifications. One of them is just the classic anti-Judaistic Christ killer view, which would be like what most Christians had through the Middle Ages, where they just said these people are the enemies of the faith because they won't convert. It had nothing to do with their race, economics, finance, anything about that. Physical features, whatever. It just had to do with they're not Christians. So it really didn't matter what race they were. That was kind of the standard anti-Semitism.
There was a funny TV show on with Martin Mull back in the 70s before you kids were born called Fernwood Tonight. And there's a scene in which this this woman becomes a famous singer, and she gets on national TV eventually, and she starts talking about how she met these guys backstage who were Jewish, and she's from the South, and so she's on live TV, and she says, "Yeah, he's such a nice fella. I met him backstage. It's hard to believe they're the people what killed our Lord." and then it goes blank, and
We'll be
the
right
views
back.
of this person.
Oh, that is so
Yeah,
funny.
so I mean,
Yeah,
so that's
the people that killed our Lord.
they're the people what
There you
killed our
go.
Lord.
That's your that's first point.
Yeah,
That's your first example. Of that.
I know, and that's kind of the standard one. And the weird thing is that's probably the least common reason for anti-Semitism today.
You have a title for that?
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
It's just traditional anti-Judaism. It's
okay.
not. It's
Christ
more
killer.
Christ killer one.
Okay.
So that's one of the ones. There's something that's called the blood libel one.
yeah.
Where in Matthew it says they said, "Let the blood be on us and our head," and some Christians saw that as a kind of curse perpetually on the Jews.
Right.
Another view would be political or economic anti-Semitism. I won't hash all these out just for the sake of time. You can look this up. Just Google it. Some of this is on Wikipedia is where I got it, which has footnotes, so that's fine to do that.
Wikipedia, let's be honest.
Trustworthy.
Well, let's be honest. You take it one article at a time, and sometimes they're excellent.
Yep.
I mean, excellent, and
Sometimes excellent.
Side note.
Yeah.
How to do good research. That's a good podcast.
Yeah.
And go.
So there's also what would be like nationalistic anti-Semitism, which would be like an Enlightenment, Voltaire. Jews have particular characteristics that are against the state and the people. Greed, arrogance, and then their customs. This would kind of be the reason that the Romans didn't like the Jews either. They're tribalistic. They don't participate in civil, and so they're kind of subversive. Then another one would be
they offend the gods.
they offend the gods. They're not patriotic.
And you could see with Voltaire and even in the Enlightenment where they don't believe in a god, they're really saying kind of the same thing as the Romans did.
Very much
These
so.
Jews are offending our gods, even though we don't have,
Yep.
the gods
They're
of
atheists.
liberty.
No
And
matter how you cut it, they're a hated people. Keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The racial discrimination one, this would be the most common one that you see among like a Nazi type one, like the one you talked about, Bo. This assumes though that they are a particular race, like biologically. So what undergirds this is Darwinism, evolution.
so that would appeal to somebody who is a materialist or a
Yep.
materialist atheist mostly, or
Yep, exactly. I mean, if you're an atheist today, you're probably going to be a Darwinist of some kind, and so you have this polygenic view of human origins. They don't have a single pair like Adam and Eve.
But if you're an atheist today and a material atheist, you're not an anti-Semite by default, right?
no, not necessarily.
We're just saying that could
That could
for
be
the
a
same
reason.
reason why some Christians would go with the blood libel thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
There are more subsets of this. I want to say a few subsets here. We talked about the Christ killer one. There is the idea. This is a guy named Louis Harrop. He says that there's this economic reason for Jews. The Jew is the banker, usurer, money obsessed. This is very common. They control finance. I was talking to a person in my family about this, and the question is, well, look at all the places of power. Look at all the places in banking.
So where does that trope
CEOs.
come from, do you think? Or
They are in finance. I mean,
They're
that's
Rothschilds.
the Rothschilds. I mean, that goes back to I was looking at this French poster from 1895 that has this stereotypical predatory guy. He's supposed to be a Jew, and he's got his whole hands over the globe, and it says Rothschilds in French. So the idea is that yes, it is true. Jamie Dimon, who's CEO of Chase, is Jewish. The guy who owns BlackRock,
but what's
private
the
equity.
origin? What's the origin from that?
Well, the origin is that Jews were in finance.
I mean, not the origin of the false or negative stereotype, but
Well, the origin back in the Middle Ages that
Yeah.
Jews were not allowed to participate in politics in the church, and so the only thing they were allowed to do was finance, banking, because of lending. Christians were not allowed to lend to other Christians at interest.
So you wouldn't be totally excited to jump on the bandwagon like me about let's say it was foretold in Scripture how hated they would be. So what's your take on that then? Because it seems like a
the question obviously again goes back to what we talked about. Like, is there a fulfillment, or why is the hatred continue to the present day?
Could
Yes,
it be? Could it be a
Scripture says-
fulfillment? I don't know.
Yeah, I certainly think so.
Well, it's another one of those. I think it's
For the simple people like me.
well, I think it's an example of God says that that's going to happen, and it happens through means. I mean, and so in other words, people are going to hate, Jews as God's chosen people, and they're going to come up with all kinds. Humans are ingenious. They're going to come up with all kinds of reasons to hate them.
Unbelievable.
And it is true because I think there is a deep connection, obviously deep connection. Humanity of Jesus comes from Jews, and so there's a hatred that's even deeper than what people would say. I mean, in Islamic eschatology, if you want to call it that, it involves killing of Jews before Muhammad returns to earth with Jesus.
Yeah.
And then Jesus, remember in the Quran, exalts Muhammad. So think about that. Think about that like a twisted end times view where Jews are killed. Where in Christian eschatology, at least the ones we're talking about, Jewish conversions, the preservation of the people. And so God's promises to restore the kingdom involve the Jews continuing. So you could see that Satan continues to attack them.
To me, it's very simple. And that's probably why people who are dispensational have a friendly outlook towards, because we see God's hand in it all. I don't know. You said something about that earlier. You labeled it something, but it would be kind of why people who are more, I guess, simple or dispies like me, I would say it's just an amazing testament to the reality of the sovereignty of God. And,
Well, yeah. So, like, if you look at Romans 11, and you view that as so all Israel shall be saved.
All Israel shall be saved.
Yeah. So, if you see that, if you view it as an end time fulfillment or a consummation, like the consummation of the age, regardless of whether you're dispensational or amillennial or historic premill, because I know people from different eschatological points of view that both see that as a future fulfillment of ethnic Israel, and some that don't. Okay, so so you can have an eschatology that but if you think that Romans 11 is talking about this fulfillment, this ingathering of ethnic Israel, then you can see why people would want to unknowingly subvert that and try to keep that from happening.
Sure. It just seems like a simple way to explain sort of all that's we're encompassing, all the hatred in general towards those people.
I would say two things too about that. I mean, when you hear, say, the popular college protests against Israel, they usually the phrase is settler colonialism, which is kind of somewhat of a new category.
Yeah.
So this would be another the multi-headed hydra. Another head has come up. The settler colonialism is kind of the newest anti-Semitism, where the Jew is the archetypal colonizer, white person supplanting a person of color. Although if you actually look at the people, you're like, they
Right,
actually
that's
don't
not
look
actually
that different.
white. Wait.
There were blue-eyed, blonde-haired Palestinians. I've been in Jordan, so it's really a somewhat of a bogus category to divide those. But the idea is they are the archetypal Marxist colonialists because they're capitalist and successful. So that would be the modern one for a secular person.
Interesting.
It's not about Christ.
Oppressor, oppressed.
Yep. It's not
Right,
about
so-
Islam, not about Christianity, not even about finance. It's about the idea of oppression, oppressed categories, critical theory.
Yeah, so like you said, a multi-headed hydra, so that's why I think it really does come down to, like many things, you're actually going to have to get in a conversation with somebody and find out why they're anti-Semitic, because you're not going to be able to.
You're probably going to have to explain the gospel
You
to
can
them
group
too.
them into 4 categories.
You can say which
so
category.
that's helpful. 4
That is very
categories.
helpful. Thank you, Ryan.
But you know what?
Thank you,
Within those categories, you're going to have
Subcategories.
absolutely.
But let me tell you something that would probably be the most relevant to the average hearer of this podcast. There are conservative, I'll say conservative, I won't say right wing because that's loaded, but conservative reasons for anti-Semitism that have gained traction in
Oh yeah.
the spheres of influence we have. I want to say this is one of the categories too that Jews are associated with revolutionary and communist ideas.
Yeah, Marxism.
Socialism, communism, atheism that comes with communism. So this
And the subversion of culture
subversion of culture.
as a Marxist sort of tactic.
Yep. And that's when you go, who's in Hollywood? Who's running Hollywood?
Ooh, yeah.
Who's running, how many Jews are judges on superior courts? How many Jews were connected with the Soviet Union in its early days?
Or how many Jews were paid off by George Soros?
Yeah, so a good example. Soros is this archetype.
Isn't Soros Jewish?
Yes.
I thought he was.
Hungarian
Yeah,
Jews.
thank God.
And
Okay.
so it becomes
Got that right.
it becomes in some ways you can find what you're looking for, right? So
Right.
but Judaism only since the mid 19th century took a secular turn. And obviously Orthodox Jews in Israel are not this way. They have a lot more in common with us. However, most Jews are secular. They're the most secular demographic, meaning not religious. Highly numbered atheists. So secularism isn't inherently Jewish, even though there is a lot in the Old Testament that has to do with this age, this earth, which really Christianity shares. But many people see that and they think, well, everything that is anti-family, LGBT, communist is coming from Jews. And that would be a false judgment. But I can understand why someone might say, look at the world we live in and find someone to blame. Scapegoating. Now, I think the answer would be, well, there's actually a lot of the conservative people you have as well are Jewish as well. It's just that the number of Jews that are educated and wealthy is a very high number. The success is astounding.
Yeah. So if you talk to a conservative Jewish person like a Dennis Prager or
Ben Shapiro.
yeah, Ben Shapiro, or even somebody who's a classic liberal secularist like Alan Dershowitz or something.
Yeah.
They'd be the first to point this out or to say amen. Like you have this over representation of secular Jews who are
Powerful.
and who are left leaning, very left leaning.
Yeah. And it hasn't always been that way. That's the part
No.
that I think it's a kind of a ridiculous judgment to say that there's something inherently Jewish about communism. There's not really. The weird thing is that once, like Trotsky, Lenin had a Jewish background. There's a lot of Jews in Russia and Ukraine. But there were a lot of anti-Jewish Soviet laws.
Yes.
So communism becomes, in a weird way, even though Karl Marx is Jewish, also anti-Jewish. Because it's weird how you could say the Jews can be the communists and they're also the arch capitalists at the same time. That's one of the things of anti-Semitism. They end up becoming, in a sense, like villains with contradictory offenses. And that's the part I think that deeply gets into like an element that's like deeply spiritual or demonic. Like,
Right.
why would you want this people?
Yeah, that was the conclusion. Like when you tied that up, I just went, okay, so we're talking about something metaphysical here, because the people aren't making sense.
They're not making sense.
Yeah, and they're not making sense in an evil way, which will go badly for the Jew. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think, that probably would be a good point to sum up. I mean, you do find out in the incarnation. I mean, you have the story of Herod at Christmas. He wants to kill Christ. And he is the dragon of Revelation 12, which I believe looks back to that. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And
I knew it.
I preached it 2 times already this church. So,
That's one of the few. That's one of the few visions in Revelation that a lot of Christians believe across different views.
they agree on that.
They see it as historical. Yeah.
Historical, yes. It's
Yeah.
not just future.
They see it as a partial fulfillment, a preterist.
And I would say this to someone who would think, well, why is that so important for Christians? Evangelicals are just carrying water for Jewish interests or whatever else, and maybe kind of mock us.
Right.
And I think the answer would be like, listen, I don't know the details of how the end times are going to work out, obviously, and I'm not going to claim to do that. But I do think, one, there's no other group of people that are hated on such a wide scale, and God does have a plan for the people in some sense in the future. And even if he didn't, I still should be opposing things like genocide.
Yes.
That should be common sense to me.
Yeah.
So you should lament that when you see the opposition, you should be like, this is something very wrong. And Christians that have stood up for it and defend it, they should continue to do so, and you should teach your children to do that as well. So I would, Jesus is forever a Jew.
Jesus is forever a Jew.
And there's no
Sorry.
scandal having a Jewish woman playing Mary in a Netflix movie.
They're just trying to be
Come on.
accurate. I don't understand the big
Fact check.
controversy.
She's from the region that was Syria Palestinian. Well, friends, I mean, O come thou rod of Jesse free, and free us from Satan's tyranny. So have a Merry Christmas.
Have a Merry dispensation.
And I'm sure we'll a dispensation.
That's the one thing about dispensationalists.
We love to
They're
wear
militant.
it. We love to wear it right
Yep.
here on our.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get a necklace.
God bless us.
A T-shirt.
God bless you, everyone. Merry Christmas.
bless us
Should we
all.
say Merry Christmas? Shalom.
Shalom.
1, 2, 3.
Maranatha.
Merry Christmas. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas. Okay.